this presentation will be quite short. Really what I wanted to do was to introduce the study site and the ideas behind the next couple of presentations. So really I wanted to introduce to you the Carlisle heathlands and the work we've been doing there for the last few years. So this is the Carlisle heathlands. It's a beautiful bit of country, and apologies that you can't see it on full screen. We've been interested in this place for a while. It's on the boundary between the Gadabinoo, Kirrawurrung and Goolagin mobs, and the particular bit of the heath that we're working in is Gadabinoo country. The reason that we're interested in it sort of stems from maybe half a decade's worth of conversations, in particular with a couple of Eastern Maar people. They were particularly interested in starting to learn a little bit more about the Carlisle heath and how fire was applied in that area. In particular, of interest was the ground parrot, which has had historical records, and the Carlisle heath was burnt for the protection of that species in particular. So we were very interested to see whether or not we could learn a bit more about this patch of country. The other reason that we're interested in the area is it's highly flammable bit of ground, and in February 2020, when most of the eastern seaboard was on fire, we also had a couple of lightning strikes in the Carlisle heath that had some runs. In particular, one had a bit of a run at Jellybrand, which caused some excitement. And so there's some intention on the Carlisle heathland in terms of what needs to happen in terms of risk mitigation for the Carlisle heath. So there's a couple of ways that we're looking at this landscape, one from a risk point of view, but also one from the biodiversity point of view, and the interest that the Maar people have in species of cultural significance. In particular, the reason that the Conservation Ecology Centre has become interested in the area is its really rich mammal assemblage. So whilst a lot of species of mammal like long-nosed potoroos, southern brown bandicoot, swamp antechinus are difficult to find elsewhere, there are really, really strong populations of these species in the Carlisle heathlands. So they're associated with things like Xanthorrhea skirts. So the Carlisle heath is a really interesting system. It's maybe not as distinctly diverse in terms of its floristics as the Anglesey heath, but certainly it is more dense with grass trees, and this seems to be creating wonderful refuge for species, particularly long-nosed potoroos and southern brown bandicoots, which we've been studying. So this is one of the things that was of real interest to the Conservation Ecology Centre. We'd been trying to design research projects for a long time around bandicoots and potoroos and finding them extremely difficult to find in good numbers. And one of the things of interest to us is both wildfire and planned burns were starting to occur in the region. And we know that fire changes the game for a lot of species. So from a really complex structure of habitat, fire in this landscape can burn quite hot, and it can burn quite ubiquitously through the grass tree habitat. The fuel is contiguous, and so the fire can travel through the fine fuels and really take an area with it, often leaving behind remnant patches of vegetation in the wetter gullies, but they're slightly different types of habitats which support different species. We started to look particularly at long-nosed potoroos in this landscape. We were finding that it was just a wonderful patch of ground for them. And some of our preliminary work, though, showed some disturbing trends. In the aftermath of planned burns, we had potoroos, for instance, with GPS tracking collars on them before a planned fire, and then after the fire, all of the animals survived, but most of them didn't last very long after the fire. The assumption being that predation was largely driving that. So what we were finding was that and this diagram sort of encapsulates it, was that the vegetation once burnt was simplified, making predation far more efficient, and predators like the foxes and cats were able to knock the potoroos off that we were so desperately trying to study. So we've looked at a couple of things. So in the next couple of presentations, Mark LaPlare is going to talk about this interaction between planned burns, Potteroo movements, and mortality post-fire, and look at predator movements, which we also have collared in the same area, and how they're potentially using fire landscapes, and how they're hunting for prey. Tamika Fairley-Lima, also from the Conservation Ecology Centre, is going to talk about it from the other direction, because we've been really interested in, well, all right, so we're starting to get these events with high mortality of Potteroos post-burning, but how can we mitigate that? So one thing that we're trialling through the Wild Otways initiative is to introduce predator control post-burn, so particularly with foxes, looking at controlling populations of predators post-burns using baits and ground shooting. The other thing that we're looking at is leaving more unburnt sections of Xanthorrhea country within a burn scar, so that there are more refugia for these animals, particularly potoroos and bandicoots, to utilise after the fire occurs. What Tamika is looking at is whether, if by changing this practice of burn activity and leaving more refugia or unburnt country in the landscape, we are actually influencing how effective these planned burns are at reducing fire hazard within the summer bushfire period. And we know it's important that if we just look at it from the biodiversity perspective, and we don't take in the community's concerns and the agency's concerns around risk to communities and life, we're not going to find that balance that we need. So that's why Tamika is going to present the work that she is. She's also working with a population viability analysis of potoroos. I'm not sure that she will have an opportunity to speak about this today, and this is really preliminary, but it is going to look at incorporating some of the hypothetical burn regimes into a population viability analysis of potoroos to see how that influences their survival. So really interesting stuff. At the end of it, we hope to be able to present to Forest Fire Management Victoria a recipe book, effectively, that might be able to balance fuel hazard and these mammal populations into the future, which is really exciting. We have to acknowledge that it's been an extraordinarily good partnership between research institutions like the University of Melbourne Conservation Ecology Centre with the fire agencies, Parks, DELP, and Forest Fire Management Victoria. The reason I did this introductory thing to the Carlisle Heath is because the last time I got to see Mark present, he did an extremely long introduction. So I thought I'd just chop that necessity out for him, because he's got a very data-rich presentation to give to us.